Imagine a frozen fjord above the Arctic Circle. Snow whipped sideways, the water is black and narrow, hemmed in by mountains that fall straight into the sea. Somewhere inside that maze of rock and ice, 10 German destroyers are hiding, low on fuel, low on ammunition, and cut off from home. In a matter of days, most of them will be gone, and with them, one of Hitler's best chances to control the North Atlantic. This is Narvik, spring 1940. A quiet Norwegian port that turned into a pivot point for the war's first year. A place where steel, geography, and courage collided. Here's the simple reason Narvik mattered. In winter, the Baltic Sea ices over. Germany still needed Swedish iron ore to feed its factories and build tanks, guns, and ships. In summer, ore could sail from Swedish ports on the Baltic. In winter, it could not. The lifeline moved north to the ice-free port of Narvik, connected by rail to the massive iron mines at Kiruna and Gällivare. Every ship that left Narvik carried the stuff that kept Germany's war machine alive. Choke Narvik, and you starve the steel. Protect Narvik, and you keep the engines of war turning. Norway was neutral. But neutrality is fragile when geography refuses to pick a side. The British watched those ore ships and worried. If Germany kept the winter route open, the enemy's steel production would stay strong. If Britain could block it, German rearmament would slow. Plans began to mine Norwegian waters, to stop ore shipments without invading Norway itself. The Germans guessed this, feared it, and decided to move first. They launched Operation Weserübung in April 1940, the sudden occupation of Denmark and Norway, to lock down the Norwegian coast and secure the ore route for good. Before dawn on April 9th, 10 German destroyers forced their way through the Ofotfjord toward Narvik, carrying mountain troops, Gebirgsjäger, under General Eduard Dietl. It was a bold run through narrow waters and heavy weather. Norwegian coastal defenses fired. There were moments of resistance and confusion. Norway was neutral, but it was also under attack, and the warning time was measured in minutes. Within hours, the Germans had seized Narvik. The mountain troops fanned out along the heights and passes, while the destroyers huddled in the fjords, short on fuel and far from friendly air cover. The British reaction came fast. On April 10th, Captain Bernard Warburton-Lee led the Royal Navy's 2nd Destroyer Flotilla into the fjord at dawn, charging through snow squalls so thick a ship could vanish at 200 yards. It was audacity against audacity. Destroyers racing down a mountain corridor of water, torpedoes launching at point-blank range, gunfire echoing from rock faces. The British hit hard. German ships took blows they could not easily repair. But the British paid for their rush. Warburton-Lee was killed on the bridge of his flagship, HMS Hardy, after orchestrating a strike in some of the worst conditions imaginable. He would be awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. The immediate result was messy. Both sides battered, the Germans still in possession of Narvik, their destroyers damaged but not destroyed. 3 days later, the Royal Navy came back with a hammer. On April 13th, HMS Warspite, an old battleship with new purpose, steamed into the fjord escorted by destroyers. Her spotter plane, launched from a catapult, found and sank a lurking U-boat. The task force advanced, methodically clearing side fjords, chasing the German ships up narrow arms of water where there was no room to maneuver. German destroyers, out of fuel and ammunition, began to ground themselves or scuttle to avoid capture. The confined geography that had once promised shelter now became a trap. By the end of the day, the German surface force at Narvik was essentially annihilated. It was a loss the Kriegsmarine could not easily replace. In the first year of the war, Germany's destroyer force was gutted in a single Arctic campaign, and the ripple would be felt in convoy battles and coastal operations for months. But Narvik was more than a naval duel. On land, the fight turned to a test of endurance on snow and rock. Dietl's mountain troops were tough, experienced, and well-led. They held the ridges and passes that ringed the town. They were also at the end of a very long supply line. The Allies began to arrive. British troops, French units, including the Foreign Legion, and Polish soldiers eager to fight after the fall of their homeland. Norwegian forces, already in action, joined them. If you picture a clean map with arrows, set it aside. This was an alpine grind. Patrols on skis. Avalanches waiting to kill the unwary. Steep slopes where 100 meters could take an hour. Men fighting for each knoll and outcrop, then digging foxholes in frozen ground. The sea was near, but the front was vertical. Despite the hardship, the Allied pressure worked. The Germans found themselves squeezed eastward toward the Swedish border. On May 28th, the Allies retook Narvik. It was a real victory. They had dislodged the invaders from the port that fed Germany's winter ore habit. They had broken the local naval power. They were finally in position to push the remaining German troops out into the high country, beyond reach of easy resupply. For a brief moment, the narrative looked hopeful. Hold the port, destroy the ore shipments, and force Germany to fight with less steel. Then the map of Europe shifted under everyone's feet. In mid-May, Germany sliced into France with speed and coordination that stunned the world. Within days, the crisis on the Western Front eclipsed everything else. The Allies made a painful decision. Norway could no longer be the priority. Ships and troops had to move south to rescue what they could of the British Expeditionary Force and support France. The order went out to evacuate Norway. Operation Alphabet, an unglamorous name for an unglamorous retreat, began. By June 8th, Allied troops were gone from Narvik. They had done what damage they could to port facilities so the Germans would not use them immediately. The town, battered and burned, passed back under occupation. If you pause right there, you might ask, did it all matter if the Allies took Narvik only to leave it? The answer is yes, for three reasons. First, the naval outcome was decisive. Germany's destroyer losses in the Narvik campaign broke the back of their early war surface strength. Destroyers are not glamorous like battleships, but in modern naval war, they are essential. Escorts, torpedo platforms, workhorses of every operation. Losing almost a dozen in the Arctic left the Kriegsmarine short-handed at exactly the moment it needed flexibility for Norway, the North Sea, and the Atlantic approaches. Second, Narvik became a harsh lesson in coalition logistics and command. The Allies struggled to align plans, integrate forces, and fight in terrain that punished any delay. Those failures were exposed in public. In Britain, the Norway Debate in Parliament hammered the government. The political fallout helped bring down Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and pushed Winston Churchill into the top job in early May 1940, right before the storm in France reached its peak. That leadership change shaped the rest of the war. Third, Narvik was a blueprint for a certain kind of warfare that would return later: joint operations in extreme environments. The campaign showed what was possible with sea power, air scouting, specialized troops, and hard supply work. It also showed the limits when strategy at the theater level pulled the plug. There's a deeper layer. Narvik proved that a small place can carry outsized weight when it sits on a resource chokepoint. Iron ore is not dramatic on film. It's rock and dust and heavy trains. But when those trains roll down to a port that never freezes, and that port keeps a superpower's steel hot in winter, the quiet station in the snow becomes a target of global importance. Control the chokepoint, or pay the price. The same principle shows up across the war: oil fields, rail hubs, canals, and straits. Narvik is the Arctic version of that truth. Think of the crews and soldiers who lived those weeks. British destroyer sailors navigating fjords by squall flashes and memory. German mountain troops digging in against wind that froze rifle bolts. Norwegian defenders torn between old neutrality and the instant reality of invasion. French legionnaires and Polish riflemen climbing on crampons where a misstep meant a slide into rock and ice. Pilots in open cockpits hunting periscopes in water that would kill a man in minutes. Civilians watching their town burn, then watching it rebuild, then face occupation. Names like Ofotfjord, Ankines, and Bjørnfjell that to outsiders are just syllables, but to the people who lived there are places with graves. Could the Allies have stayed if France had not imploded? Maybe. Holding Narvik would have meant turning a temporary victory into a sustained Arctic campaign with long supply lines, few airfields, and constant submarine threat. Even with the port in friendly hands, the mountains favor the defender, and the weather defies schedules. It would have taken more ships, more aircraft, more winter gear, and more political will than Britain and France had in May 1940. The German army that surged through the Ardennes settled the argument for them. Strategy is choice under pressure. Narvik was a hard choice. After the evacuation, German control over Norway tightened. The ore route through Narvik eventually resumed, but it never again felt invulnerable. The shock of the April and May battles lingered. The Royal Navy had proved that even in enemy-held waters, with the odds complicated by mountains and snow, a determined force could change the equation in a day. Warspite's run up the fjord became a legend in mess halls and wardrooms, quoted for the way old ships, bold crews, and a single good plan could shift a campaign's balance. There was political legend-making too. Churchill's ascent during the Norway crisis became part of his story. The bulldog called up when the old guard faltered. History is never just about guns and ships, it's also about debates and resignations, and the way public opinion hardens around a narrative. Narvik provided the facts on the ground that drove those narratives in London. Walk Narvik today and you'll find memorials, museum displays, and wreckage still settled on the seabed. The fjords now are quiet, the ore trains still move. The mountains are eternal and indifferent. But if you stand by the water in the long twilight of early summer, and if you imagine the thunder of naval guns rolling down the valley, you can feel how close the past really is. You can feel the logic of the place. Narrow waters, high walls, one way in, one way out. It's as if the land itself wrote the script for what happened in 1940. So why did Narvik matter? Because it showed that a war decided in factories can still turn on a single port. Because it erased a chunk of Germany's naval strength at the very moment Hitler needed options. Because it exposed the Allied machine, forcing it to get better or fail. Because it helped to rearrange political leadership in Britain at the exact hour when resolve was needed most. And because the people who fought there, on steel decks and snowy ridges, taught the rest of the world how hard and how costly Arctic warfare would be. If this story pulled you in, if you want more about Norway's World War II, from the heavy water sabotage to the resistance networks and the hidden battles in the north, subscribe for the next chapter. Like the video to push it to more history fans, share it with someone who loves a sharp human war story, and drop a comment with the moment that struck you most. Warspite's charge, the ski patrols in the dark, or the political shockwaves in London. I read every one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.